I'm sorry. We're gonna get the meeting started today or tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased by everybody that I'm seeing both online and in person with interest in pursuing an ADU. I'm Brittany Bendix. I'm the town planner, and I'll be taking us through a brief presentation tonight before my colleagues and I will split up, and we're happy to answer any sort of direct questions you might have about your property. We can look up some of the information and go through that. In terms of handouts that are available in the meeting room tonight and will become available online, we have a printout of the ADU ordinance as it's been most recently adopted. We have a copy of the presentation, and then we have a flyer that many of you may have already seen and that is also currently available on our website. It has the same heading that we have on our first slide here. It's really just kind of a brochure about ADU or accessory dwelling units in Atherton. So our agenda tonight is a brief overview of ADUs, just to make sure everybody here is on the same page. Then we'll look specifically at ADU provisions in Atherton, some overviews in terms of next steps for how to build your own ADU. Then we'll turn it to you and everybody that's in this room with general questions and answers. It's really important that you speak directly into the mic so that those watching on Zoom can hear your question. They likely have the same question. This is definitely a circumstance where everybody really is thinking kind of similarly. We're also recording this meeting, so we'll put that up online as well. And so that'll give others an opportunity to ask questions hear the questions and answers that were provided in this meeting. After we get through kind of just general question and answers, we'll have the opportunity for you to talk to me or my senior planner here, Radha, or Leilani, who's an assistant planner with us. Leilani is frequently at the counter and may have already met some of you in terms of answering and researching some specific ADU questions that you have. At that point of the evening, we'll stop the online presentation because it'll really be more of an informal breakout session. Are there any builders of ADUs in the room tonight? Any professionals? Okay.
We will be building them.
Okay. We do have a lot of builders that do ADUs in the town, so I was hoping we might get a couple tonight. There might be some online. If anybody online is watching this and is a builder and wants to let others know that you've been practicing in the town, that would be helpful. So getting right into it, what is an accessory ADU? We have quite a breadth of configurations through state law now in terms of what you can do with an ADU. Really, the issue is that it needs to be separate and distinct from the single family residence and self-contained. It needs to be on the same lot as a single family residence, whether it's new or existing. We do see a lot of proposals for new construction coming in with ADUs now. An ADU is typically between 500 square feet and 1,200 square feet. We'll get to the smaller example in a minute. And then the town state law allows 2 ADUs per lot. One is usually a converted structure and the other is a detached structure. And then the town has gone beyond that, and in certain circumstances, which I'll cover later, allows a bonus 3rd detached ADU on lots that are 2 acres and bigger. And so the graphics here on the screen really just kind of give you a sense of how ADUs interface with the single family home. The ADU is in red, the single family home is in green. So you have at the top left, a detached configuration, the middle, an attached, and then you have above an attached but single story, also above the garage, and then even a basement example. So there really is quite a few different configurations that you can work with now. So then we also have this thing called a junior ADU, which is a junior accessory dwelling unit. This is contained entirely within the single family home. It can be new construction or existing. One distinction is that it also may share a bathroom with a main residence. It must also be on the same lot as a single family home, new or existing. And it's really limited to 500 square feet or less. And again, there's only one per lot. And you'll see lots of the same configurations are allowed based on the graphics that I've shown here, but I've grayed out the detached configuration because that is not allowed for a junior accessory dwelling unit. It's really meant to function as part of the single family living space or an extension of it. So what are some of the benefits that we see in providing an ADU on a single family lot? Well, we have research has shown that it's increasing property values. It provides an increase in a housing affordability for both homeowners and their tenants because they're smaller than your typical single family home. It creates a wider range of housing options. This can be used for multi-generational family. It can be used for caretakers that live on the property. So there's a lot of flexibility in who the ADU is actually serving. And again, also housing for relatives, friends, or coworkers. And then of course, sidebar for the town is helping us meet our RENA requirement. So the town has a requirement to provide 280 new units by 2031 as part of the housing element that was adopted by the city council in 2023. And then that basically puts us on a path of 35 new ADUs or junior ADUs per year. And we just did our first look at how we're performing in 2023 and we're on track. So things are looking good, but this is kind of our first push since we've adopted an ordinance to update consistent with state law to really get those numbers coming year after year. So what is involved in building an ADU? There's really 5 key steps. The first one is planning, and this is probably the most critical in terms of figuring out what you can do and what this path is going to look like for you. It's really the part where you do your homework. So everybody showing up tonight, watching online, like great first step. You are doing everything you're supposed to be doing right from the beginning. Really then what you're looking at is what can you build and what your budget is to support that. The next step then goes beyond just talking about this as a family or a homeowner and really reaching out to professionals in the field, not just asking questions of the planning department or the building department, but starting to build your team and looking at what type of professionals you want to bring into your project. Are you going to be using an architect? Are you working with a design builder, or are you pretty savvy on your own and really just need the contractor side of things? From there, once you know who your team is, you'll start working on the initial design phase. After that, you'll want to get early consultation. It's really important that even though you're checking in with planning tonight, you continue to do that with both planning and building kind of throughout the process until you have a permit in hand, or even when you have a permit and you're doing work, something is bound to come up. And maintaining that relationship, having a point of contact with the planning or the building department helps really get you through those challenging parts of the process. So after plan consultation, then of course there's refinement. And this really is kind of an iterative process. You go through it a couple times. Really shouldn't be that much. I would say 2 or 3 revisions is kind of reasonable. Anything beyond that, you want to start reaching out to me as the town planner or perhaps the chief building official to raise a flag. Why do we keep cycling through this? Something seems off. And that gets us to the permitting phase. So you're going to have different permit submittals. There might be a permit with planning, there could be a permit with building. And then beyond that, you're going to be working through what utilities do you need? Do you have an existing water connection? How are you getting electricity? We're hearing a lot of people struggling with their ADU can't connect to the PG&E meter of their single family home, and PG&E is taking quite a long time to schedule appointments with. So that's the kind of value, maybe talking to a professional, not a planner, because I don't make appointments with PG&E. Early on in the process, that's where you get some like different type of insight that's really going to help make this a smooth venture for you. And then, of course, all of that leads to, again, plan refinements and that iterative process that I was talking about. Once you have a permit issued, that's really the beginning of your construction phase and you'll want a team lined up. So that's another reason why working with a professional might be a little bit more easier to get those different specialists involved. That throughout the construction process, there might be intermittent inspections so that you have to have an inspection before you can move on to another phase of the work. It really all depends on how intensive your project is. And then it ends with a final inspection and ultimately a certificate of occupancy that says somebody can live here. So our final phase is moving in, and that involves setting a rent and finding a tenant. Tonight's focus is really on kind of the first step of this process and helping you start identifying what the obstacles or challenges might be in moving forward with an ADU. But we will have follow-up workshops where we can help you with the move-in process. We're partnered with um, a nonprofit organization called HIP Housing, where they've been doing a lot of the work of background checks, interviews up front to help make it easier for you to find people to rent the unit. I know a lot of people are starting this process with the objective of maybe providing housing for somebody in your family or an employee that works on your property. But you know, that's a very important short-term need to fill. Long-term, you might want to start considering what the options would be after that. So ADU regulations in Atherton. Over the past year, the town, the planning commission and the city council have had a number of hearings to kind of refine the adopted ADU ordinance in a way that meets the state's requirements and aligns with state law, but also gives the town some local influence. And really what they found, what the commission and the council found in setting the ordinance standards is that the public comment really circulated around privacy, protection of trees, and then protection of the semi-rural nature that Athertonians really value. So the key incentive kind of rooted in the town's ADU ordinance strategy is to incentivize applicants to comply as much as possible with the setbacks for building development that the town has already put forward. So I have that as the first item on the right side of the screen. You'll see why this is important. State law allows ADUs that are 800 square feet or less to provide a setback of 4 feet at the side or rear of the property and no setback from the front. The town really values that spatial feeling. There's also quite a few trees on the edges of properties. And so the incentive here is to provide or maintain the 10-foot setback that the town has for accessory structures, for ADU or detached ADUs, and then pretty much anything that's attached to the main residence has to comply with the setback requirements for the main residence. You'll see that the building and planning application fees are then structured to be 0 for any ADU that chooses to conform with the town's setback standards. So there is a fee for ADUs that are 800 square feet and taking advantage of that 4-foot setback or 0-foot setback from the front. But the incentive here is to allow not only a larger ADU, but a free application process. We also have a privacy screening and landscaping standard that we've added. This is going to require a solid 8-foot tall fence for the entire property line that the ADU is adjacent to, where it is closer than 10 feet to that property line. And then it's also required if an ADU is located above the garage. The town didn't have to allow ADUs located above detached garages, but again, this was a way to incentivize compliance with that setback standard. And finally, bonus ADUs, that's another thing that the town wasn't required to do by state law, but they're using that not just as a means to facilitate the required setbacks, but to try and get more affordability out of the ADU program that counts towards the RENA numbers and hopefully enables Atherton to meet the housing objectives set by the state. So some other some other requirements that I think are worth noting as you start thinking about placement of an ADU on your property. First is entrance requirements. Both ADUs and JADUs do require a separate entrance. And the way the town has crafted that language is that they're asking where feasible, the entrance should face the side or rear yard. So what that means is when you're submitting an application, if it's not facing, if the entrance isn't facing the side or rear yard, you're gonna have to present to planning that there really wasn't any alternative. The next is height limits. State law requires 16 feet for a detached ADU, 18 feet for a detached ADU if it meets certain transit proximity conditions, 25 feet for an ADU, and then 25 feet for an ADU above a detached garage. That was the town's approach to enabling ADUs above garages. And the height there was set to be consistent with the next item, which is 25 feet for an ADU attached to a single family residence. And so, and then this is limited to 2 stories. You can't squeeze a 3rd story in there as a partial basement with 2 additional stories. I don't even know if you would want to do that because it would eat away from a lot of your footprint. But there is that added requirement. The next provision I'll mention is the tree protection zones. This is not applicable to ADUs and ADUs up to 800 square feet or JADUs up to 500 square feet. Although we did add in a provision like an asterisk unless state law changes, just in case we have the ability to reserve our protection of trees. So we also created an administrative TPZ process for ADUs that are greater than 800 square feet. This diminished a distance that was previously required of 8x down to 6x, and allows our town arborist to approve it administratively instead of taking it to the planning commission. So that's kind of an expediting of time and review. And just to clarify, so 8x means 8 times the distance, 8 times the diameter of the heritage tree that's being protected. That's the distance that the ADU would have to be set back from. And finally, a note that there are requirements for parking depending on the type of ADU that you're providing and whether or not you're close to transit. So building your own ADU, what are some critical next steps? The first is, of course, attending this presentation and chatting with the planners afterwards. And then also visiting the town's ADUs Resource Center. That's a website that we have. It's pretty easy to find from the planning department's webpage. And then you can also, if you don't want to stay tonight, or if you're watching online, you can email us at ci.atherton.ca.us. That email goes to all of our planning staff. We have about 4 people right now. And then calling. We check those voicemails pretty regularly, and so we can get back to you by voicemail as well. Finally, there's the option to visit us in person. We're here in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. for the morning shift, and then 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. for the evening shift. So with that, I will turn it over to you, my audience, with any questions. Fine. Yes, you're being picked up online.
I had a question on an ADU versus an accessory building, and there are really 2 questions. One, on the separate entrance. If you were to do not to do an ADU, but to do an accessory building, do you still have to have a separate entrance?
No,
No.
but if you were to do an accessory structure or an accessory building and then come back to us and say, I want to convert that to an ADU, then we would tell you, okay, well, you need to file a permit to change the use designation, and you're going to be required to put in an entrance.
Okay, so a separate entrance, even though it doesn't, it's not easy, but if you couldn't do a separate entrance, you could talk to you and do the existing entrance, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the tree protection zone, is that the same for an ADU as it is for an accessory building?
No, it's actually more flexible for an ADU than it is for an accessory building.
Oh, okay, okay, good, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Question on the tree protection. So if I'm within my setback 10 feet, but my neighbor has a heritage tree right on the property line, 10 feet away, how do you measure the required distance? Is it still the eight times that diameter?
Yes, so they would look at the neighboring tree and they would take that distance relative from that tree located on your neighbor's property.
But that only applies to ADUs above 800 square feet, right?
Correct.
So, yeah.
I'm just a little confused. You had two things up there, setback 4 feet, setback 10 feet. One was state, one was city. Building a ADU, is it 4 feet or is it 10 feet?
It depends on the size. So if it's 800 square feet or less, then it can be 4 feet. But if it's larger than 800 square feet, it can go all the way up to 1,200 square feet. Then it needs to be 10 feet.
Okay, and then when you call 800 square feet, it's the inside square footage? If you have covered patio and everything like that, is that considered a square footage against the ADU?
So it's not, you said inside square footage and I gotta be technical here. It's actually measured from the exterior faces of the
Right,
walls.
yeah.
But it would not include the patio attached.
Even though if it's covered or,
We would have to look at what the nature of the coverage is and how, yeah.
I have a couple clarifying questions. One is this, a detached ADU would require a separate PG&E meter.
That is really up to PG&E to determine. I'm seeing a head nod here from one of our design professionals who's saying it does not require.
It does not.
Can you go ahead and say this into the mic?
Hello, I'm Laura May. I'm an architect with Pacific Peninsula Architecture. I was just saying we do a lot of work in the town. So I came tonight just to kind of weigh in on some things. So I did check, this came up last week, if PG&E requires a separate meter for an ADU, and they do not. So just clarifying that for everybody, because I know that's kind of a hurdle that a lot of people are concerned about. So
And then does it require a different street number?
It does. So we did clarify that. That was a determination that in consultation with the acting chief building official, we took all the way to the fire marshal who confirmed, yes, a separate address is required. It's really for emergency purposes. And then we do have a provision in the ordinance that requires that the address be the same street as the primary structure. So even if you're on a corner lot and let's say you're on Atherton and Berry, I like picking that parcel for some reason. It's an intersection I know well. You're at Atherton and Berry and the primary structure has an address on Atherton, but the ADU is closer and has access onto Berry. The address for the ADU still needs to be Atherton Avenue.
I'm sorry, I hate to
Sure.
monopolize. There was a slide about the 8-foot fence, and is that only if it's larger than 800 square feet?
No, that's for anything that's within, so if it's 800 square feet or less and it's within the 10-foot setback, then it's gonna trigger the 8-foot tall the 8-foot tall fence. Unless you have compensating landscaping, existing landscaping, which you would need to work with planning to demonstrate that you meet that eligibility. Really what we're looking for is some solid screening. I asked the council if they wanted to let, how dense they wanted the vegetation and they said opaque. So that's the language that's in there and that's the bar we're looking for as an alternative to the fencing requirement.
Thank you.
And
Go ahead, speak into the mic, please.
So if you have a separate address, where do you register that at? I mean, other than just having a sign that says it's not a different parcel.
Sure, so that's gonna come through the building permit process. Is that, yeah, so during the building permit review, the building department would route that permit to the fire marshal for confirmation that the address assignment meets whatever their standards are.
But that's just to satisfy the fire department.
Really, that's
Yeah, because it doesn't matter anyplace else.
correct, and that's really so that you can, so that people that are in the ADU can be found and located in the
Yeah.
event of an emergency.
Yeah, but as far as title and the parcel numbers, that, you know, that's in effect.
Mailbox, like mail.
Mm, right, it would come up with mail,
Yeah,
mail
yeah.
delivery, and there are some standards relative to the mailbox
And a
location.
follow-up on that question about the PG&E. You know, you're not required to have a separate PG&E, but what since, you know, a lot of the objective of this thing is to create rental properties,
Mhm.
not saying that that's what we're gonna do with it. But what happens if somebody wants a separate meter?
Private meter is something from the owners have.
So Rada is telling me that a private meter is something that some owners have chosen to explore.
Yeah.
So you do have the option. I think most of the time we're hearing from people that don't want to set up another meter, and that's probably because the time that PG&E takes to actually review it. So one approach you could take is getting the ADU built with using the existing meter and of the single family residence. And then over time, seeking a second meter thereafter so that you're not so dependent on PG&E's timeline. So you could get a separate meter.
But it won't be billed through PG&E, you said?
It's not required,
Yeah, but you can.
but you can. It is an option that you can see.
The PG&E is okay with that.
Yes.
Okay. And another question. So you build this ADU, does your property tax, go up?
Oh, sorry, I was nodding as like listening to you, not as in well, relative to your property tax. It really depends on what type of ADU you're doing. The assessor is certainly going to look at what improvements you're doing to a property, so it can get really nuanced. Do you have a guest house already that maybe somebody's living in, maybe grandma? And you're just converting it on paper to an ADU? I don't know if that's gonna change your tax assessment, but that's really a question for the assessor's office. If you are doing an entirely new ADU from scratch and you're going all out and it's part of some larger project, I mean, they're going to assess you on adding a pool.
It's
So
like a remodel.
exactly. So they're gonna look at it. It's just kind of a distinction of how much of an ADU are you adding? Is this just a paperwork change or is
So
this
it
really?
is. If you build new, chances are, I mean, for sure, the added value will increase your tax base. Okay, that's fine.
So, and just a caveat and a reminder, I don't work for the assessor's office. I don't work for PG&E. I am a urban planner, town planner. A lot of the feedback that we're giving to you is based on feedback that we've heard from you or architects that are helping us out, looking things up and educating us as well. It's kind of a collective effort. But looking around and seeing who's here and if you know each other, kind of building on that relationship, I think is really helpful. What I've done in other jurisdictions in the past is if I knew of a homeowner who has gone through this process, I would have had them up here tonight so that they could give you some kind of real world experience of what it's like to be knee deep in mud, trying to manage contractors on yourself, or working with a really high-end architect or a green focused architect and the choices that you might have to make there. Those are all kind of areas where you're gonna have to do your own homework. But by all means, let me know what you learned so I can pass it around.
Do you have any
any different requirements if you have, if you use raw building from an architect, or if you use something like Adobe, a prefab type ADU that you plunk onto a foundation.
From a planning perspective, as long as it meets our setback requirements, our floor area requirements, our height requirements, that's not gonna make a big difference to us. I think that some of those prefab structures are already pretty tight when it comes to meeting building code standards, so I do think that that's a good option. But I wouldn't want to tell you that that's okay when, I'm not the building permit expert. We are looking to
Is that yes
develop,
or no?
is that, not sure. Here's what I do know.
Fair?
We are trying,
What do you say?
It was your
Is that a yes or a no? Is the
Oh, oh.
question.
we are looking to come up with
Sure.
permit-ready plans. So that'll probably be something that we launch by the end of the year, if not early next year. It's, I think now a state requirement as well, that you have a permit-ready plan set to use. Some of the resources off of our website that refer to San Mateo County's 21 Elements program, they have some model floor plans too that you can look at. They're not, print and submit these to building permit ready. But they give you a sense of what you can do with 400 square feet or 1,000 square feet, depending on what you're working with.
Do you have plans to endorse certain plan sets? Like I know that there's a certain city out in the East Bay that has a set of plan sets that you can just download and they'll just rubber stamp it and say,
So that's what I'm saying. We're gonna be working on that in over the remaining part of 2024. Our objective was to get the ordinance updated and align as we needed with state law. Now we're phasing more into, hey, let's make it easy for our homeowners to develop ADUs, and that's definitely one of the tools that we're gonna be pursuing.
Is there any work in streamlining geotechnical or civil?
That would be part of it. Designing the plans or having permit-ready plans would be a huge significant step in that.
Well, and the consulting engineers are often both a timeline and a cost, especially given the wonderful soil that we have here in parts of Athens. So I didn't know if there's any effort being made to either use the code standards as design elements rather than requiring geotechnical review, requiring civil for drainage and grading and drainage, that kind of stuff.
We're really early on in that process. So if there are pain points that you're aware of that you want to highlight as we think through what the ideal permit set would address, that would be great information to send us.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Sure.
sure.
I'm not gonna go to the floor, but I could. But I'm gonna get up. So, two things. On the question about taxes, I checked with San Mateo County last year. So this is out of date and you gotta do a check yourself. But if you call the San Mateo County tax assessor, what they told me was the number of square feet you add, they have a standard number to raise your taxes. And it will vary by there's like 3 different codes, depending on the type of construction you use. So if you add 1,000 square feet, you take 1,000 square feet, multiply it by their number, and that's your new tax base. So by definition, it'll go up, and you can get that range before you build it if you call them. And I'm sure it's changed, but you just call it tax assessor. The other question has to do with ADUs above the garage. I've sat through most of these meetings, as you well know, and I think I remember, but I don't see it here, that in this section, you say the ADU is accessed through the ground level entry vestibule and an interior staircase. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought we agreed at the previous meetings, it could be an exterior staircase as long as it was shielded from looking at the neighbor. Because if you put an interior staircase in your garage, you have a 1-car garage. So what is it?
So that is in there to avoid having an exterior staircase in the setback. There was some discussion on whether or not the staircase could be allowed in that 10-foot setback. And the discussion ended with, no, it needs to be interior or on another face of the building wall.
So I can't
That
have an
is-
exterior?
You can, just not within the setback area. Within the required setback.
So how far do I have to be from my neighbor for that to be true?
You would have to be 10 feet from the property line.
So if I have an exterior staircase, as long as it's 10 feet from the property line, things are fine.
Yes,
Okay, so I guess that's not clear here.
okay.
Setbacks. It says 4 feet. The town wants 10-foot setbacks. Or 4 feet setbacks. If you're 10 feet, say, have it comply with the town's 10 feet setbacks, you don't have to pay for planning fees. And I don't know what that is, so that's a savings. But if I build it with a 4-foot setback, the only cost to me would be to pay the planning fee.
Building and planning. Building and planning. Both have different
How
applications you would have.
significant is that?
It's 2,500 approximately for planning.
This is, I think, $509 or $509 per square foot.
509 per square foot per building.
So if I'm willing to pay that, I can build it at 4 feet setback,
Yes,
regardless of whether it's 800 square feet or 1,200 square feet.
No, that can be only 800 square feet in the 4 feet setback, sorry.
So long as I don't, 4
So-
feet is allowable, so long as it's not over 800 square feet,
Yes.
and I'm willing to pay for all the fees.
yes.
Got it. Thank you.
If it's 800 square feet, you can't be within, you can't do 4 feet setback.
If it's more than 800 square feet, you can't be within the 10.
Yeah,
feet
yeah, so long as I keep
setback.
it under 800, I can have 4 feet setback and pay the fees. Okay. So confusing.
One other quick question. If you have a 1,200 square foot accessory unit, that can be within 10 feet from all the,
No.
no.
And that's kind of what we were just going back and forth on. If it's more than 800 square feet, it has to meet the 10-foot setback.
So it has to be more than 10 feet, but only 10 feet. It doesn't have to be the same as the house. Is that correct?
If it's attached to the house,
No.
then it has, if it's, okay, so there's a lot of distinctions.
Yeah.
There's a distinction based on size. Is it 800 square feet and less, or 800 or more than 800 square feet?
I know the 800 is 4 feet. I'm talking about more than 800.
Sure, and then we're distinguishing between whether or not it's an attached ADU or a detached ADU.
That's more than 800 square feet. What are the setbacks?
So that would be 10 feet from the side and the rear.
Front.
It has to be 30 feet behind the front building wall of the main residence.
30, oh my goodness, okay. Wow, so you make it difficult for that guy.
And the tree.
And then we have a reminder here that then you remember, or you need to remember that you have the tree protection zone to pay attention to.
It's already really
Yeah.
far back. So that, there's no way. You can't do that.
What would you say that the top 3 or 4 reasons are to build an ADU versus just an accessory building?
Well, you can rent an ADU. So you can rent an ADU and you can have somebody live in the ADU.
Okay.
You're not supposed to be having people live in the accessory buildings.
So the living situation.
Yes.
And then in terms of the building, what would be the advantages of classifying it as ADU, making an ADU versus an accessory building?
What do you mean in terms of building?
Advantage. Because you're trying to encourage residents to build an ADU, right?
Yes,
Over just an accessory building, because technically I could build an accessory building and make it 1,800 square feet, or what, if my property allows it. But with the ADU, there's a limit of 1,200.
Sure.
And then you're saying now that you have to have a separate entrance, but our property won't allow it, so that would have to be an exception.
So I think the primary distinction between the two scenarios that you're laying out is whether or not somebody can live there and it is a habitable space, including a kitchen, any sort of sanitation facilities, a bedroom, like all of those components that make something habitable per the building code. It needs to be designated as an ADU versus just an extension of the single family home as a detached building. Laura May is gonna jump in here. Sure. Okay, so I've been asked by the city manager to clarify the distinction between a separate driveway and a separate entrance. When we're talking about separate entrances, we're talking about doorways, we're not talking about driveways.
Oh, talking about what? I didn't know.
We're talking about a doorway.
Just doors.
Yeah, we're not talking about a driveway or a vehicular entrance.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the separate entrance could literally be a patio door. It doesn't have to be like a defined big entry. It just has to be a door. So any patio door that opens to the side could technically be an entrance, wouldn't you agree? I think
Yes.
that qualifies.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to say was just that the ADU square footage does not count towards your allowable for your site. So some sites, if you're already maxed out on square footage allowable, the ADU does not count. So it's sort of free, quote unquote, square footage. I mean, you still have to pay to build it, but
Yeah.
so that's a huge benefit for people that are maybe, tight on square footage versus like an accessory structure would count towards your allowable for the site, right? The
Sure.
800 or 1,200 square foot ADU doesn't count towards your total allowable. So,
Sure, so just to kind of summarize, every property has a limitation on how much square footage it can have. And it may be that if you just moved in and you weren't a participant in the building of your property, you may already be at that upper limit. And so you wouldn't be able to pursue a detached accessory building that wasn't designated as an ADU because you were already up against your floor area limits. So in that way, Laura May is pointing out that there is another advantage to doing an ADU because it's almost like a square footage bonus. Yes, can you come up?
Sure. I have a question regarding fees.
Uh-huh.
So you said it was $2,500 for the planning and
Yes.
then $500 a square foot?
Roughly. Is it 509 a square foot for the building permit? And then what was planning exactly?
Same price it costs to build it.
I know, that's what I'm a little confused
Yeah,
about.
right.
Let's see.
Can't be.
So
Maybe
it's
50.
2,516 for the planning fee. No, sorry, you're right. That's the cost basis for the valuation table for building. The actual fee is 50% of what that valuation would be.
50
Wait a
what?
minute. So it's 50% of 500 times the
Square footage.
So 200,
No.
that can't be either.
This. I was-
$250 a square foot.
And the program is-
No, that can't be because a 500 square foot unit would cost like $250,000 just, that would, and then half of that would be 120.
So the city manager is informing that you're right, that that's not correct. That is in the schedule that we're looking at, so we'll take a look and see if that needs to be updated.
But both are waived if,
Both are waived if you comply with the setback requirements.
That's right. Both are way.
You
Both
waive
are-
if you're within 10 feet.
Yes,
Outside of 10 feet, but yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Can you please touch on the parking requirements for ADUs and tenants?
Sure. Let me look that up. So for a JADU, there is no parking requirement. And then there are a series of exceptions for ADUs. In the sense, really the one that is applicable is whether or not the ADU is with 1/2 mile and walking distance of public transit, which gets into a deeper definition. But typically, one off-street parking space is required per ADU. And it can be tandem. There aren't specifications for location of parking, the size of the parking space, that are embedded in the planning code. So there is some flexibility there, but you do need to at least show that there's a designated parking space in your plans. Yes.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ro Habibi. I work for the company Golden Gate Sotheby's International Realty. Our office is here in Menlo Park. And many of the people that want to build these ADUs, they're always concerned about what the return on the investment is going to be. So for, comparative market analysis, showing you basically if you spend being very conservative at a $550 per square foot and you actually do that 1,200 square feet, you are actually in the town of Atherton going to make a boatload of money. So that's a good thing. And when it comes to you picking your interior designers and your finishes and architects and general contractors, we have an amazing list of providers that have been servicing Atherton for a very long time. So if anybody needs any recommendations or wants any introductions to people that could maybe help make this whole entire process a lot easier on yourself, I could help provide that.
Are there any other questions from within the room? All right.
I remember coming to another meeting a long time ago, and I'm going back to the utilities because I thought it was required to do separate PG&E, separate water, and a separate address. So now you're saying we don't have to do separate PG&E meter?
No,
And what about water?
I believe you don't have to do it. Let me just double check. Because they've updated the state law almost annually because they're looking at, every year jurisdictions have to report on the number of ADUs among other housing units that have been developed within their jurisdiction. And that centralization of data has shown the state and HCD that, hey, the ADU standards weren't working as effectively as they wanted them to. Utility connections used to be a really big challenge and obstacle for many people. So let me just take a look here and see what it says. So a new ADU where there is an existing main residence shall not be required to have separate utility connections. So there you can see they've gone ahead and waived that.
I'll go back to that. Just say that there are complexities. This is why it's taking a long time to get now PG&E. Because they have to look at power that the unit is going to fall, whether conductors coming into the existing house, paying up the same thing on the one. So I think you should just go in optimistic, but then look at that.
So that was Commissioner Tom Bryant cautioning everyone to make sure that you follow up with the utilities directly, because as a reminder, I am not a utility expert. I do not work for the utilities. You do not want to say, well, Brittany said that I don't, Brittany said that I don't need a separate water connection is not going to go anywhere with the water company. Same with PG&E. So I've fought those battles. I don't always win them.
Pretty good excuse as far as Brittany says.
They're pretty, I think we all know how difficult those agencies can be.
So let me ask you a broader question. I think the big push here is that you guys were gonna have an amnesty program of converting existing accessory buildings into livable ADU units. Where does that stand? I mean, Is it fluid? Is it gonna happen or is it not?
Yeah, it's definitely happening. So the question is how are we going to address conversions through any sort of amnesty program? We recognize that there are definitely a lot of detached accessory structures out there. We've already communicated to a lot of property owners who we think have those structures and might want to convert them into an ADU. We know that some people already have family members living in them. So we're trying to look at some of the most straightforward processes that we can go through. In some scenarios, and when I say we, I mean me and the acting building official, although I think we have our current building official coming back this week. Really what we're looking at is what are the existing conditions of that space? What does the permit history tell us? In the most wonderful, straightforward, best case scenario, really all you need to do is submit paperwork that we can sign off on, that the chief building official can say, this is safe. Have somebody go out there and take a look. This is habitable. And then you're documented. I then can take that to HCD and say, look, we have a new ADU. Unfortunately, there are going to be some circumstances where maybe conversions, when the building was actually constructed, it had a non-habitable occupancy. It doesn't have a lot of the work that's necessary to be done to make that space habitable. And you will end up having to hire a professional to actually do that conversion. We want to make sure that we're not forcing you into something that you don't want to do either. So we're trying to figure out how best to educate you on what your options might be so that you can determine through some permit history that we provide you what your options might be. And that's why we haven't rolled out a program yet, but we are working on it.
But that's not set in stone.
No, we haven't rolled that out yet.
And the safety and is somewhat fluid because a lot of these structures were built 50 years ago or, and so the guy would come in and have a little common sense sort of a judgment. Would that be the case?
We are trying to make it a lot more definitive than just individual inspectors having a judgment call, because that's not consistent for any of our residents. It's not really transparent. We want to give you information up front saying, hey, this is what we're going to be looking for. If you don't meet these standards, you might not want to tell us
Well,
unless you want to correct it.
Right. So you have to make it, it's some sort of a gamble.
Well, and so there, you might want to reach out to the professionals in the room and talk to them about what your circumstances are, but at least we can do some initial history work with you to tell you, hey, this is this is the details that we have on this structure. So you know kind of what your baseline is.
I would just when you put stuff house, there's a whole list of disclosures you need to do. One of those is around are there permits for this cabana that someone's living in. The answer to that is no, you have to disclose it. And so the town is very interested in working with you to bring this issue, and it's a good opportunity to figure out where you're at and having a conversation. Right?
So just putting that into the mic for the record, Commissioner Bryant pointing out that permit disclosures is a part of any sort of sales transaction. And so this might be a good way to work on cleaning up the record for your own property interests moving forward.
I mean, some of these.
Another thing that was mentioned is about free square footage. So if you have an accessory dwelling that is not an ADU, say it doesn't have a kitchen or it wasn't permitted, and you upgrade it to get it permitted, you then get free square footage for that square footage. So it's very common that people do ADUs at the same time they're adding on to their principal residence. And if you're maxed out on square footage, you can add available square footage by converting an accessory dwelling to an ADU, because that gives you free square footage for what becomes that ADU, which gives you additional square footage you could add on to your main residence. That's very common.
I have a
But
question
at
about,
least an average.
I have a question about, you at one point, I know were going to require the ADUs to be all electric. Is that still the case?
No, not at the moment.
Good, thank you.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can pull up the lovely table that informs how we calculate building permit fees, because it is based on valuation of the work. And then there's a fee based on the first portion of it, then an additional. So it's not super easy. And it looks like George is going to play Vanna White tonight. Do you want to grab a mic? So, okay, let me just.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure.
But I think, just to be clear, Radha, Brittany, the compliant ADU of setbacks is a 0 permit fee for the building side and the planning side, right?
Yes.
So all we're really talking about is a calculation of a building permit for something that does not meet the setback requirements, which would be 800 square feet or less in most cases.
Correct. And within the 10 feet.
Right. Less than 10 feet, right?
Almost there.
So it's a $509 valuation per square foot. So you multiply 800 square foot ADU times 509, that's 407,000. So you find that in this table here, 100,000 to 500,000. So the first part of your permit is $1,097.40. And then that's it for this one because it's less than 500,000. So the building permit would be $1,097.40 plus 65% of that for plan check. So roughly another $700 or so. So about $1,800 building permit for a, yeah.
I know.
If it was a 1,200 square foot ADU, then you'd be down here at 500 and something thousand and, yeah. Right. Make sense?
Yes. Thank you. How much is? Clarification.
What?
So, and this is part of the Atherton fee schedule. We just didn't go deep enough when we were looking that up. It's on page 6.
On the website too.
And then you can find it on the website under master fee schedule.
Bottom line, somewhere between $1,800 to $2,500, depending if you're 800 square feet over it. But actually over 1,000 square feet or 800 square feet, you don't, the fees are free. So it's $2,000. Ballpark.
Maybe not the greatest
You know,
monetary incentive
what
here,
you're
but
spending in building one, this is nothing,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
But at least it's not $500.
I didn't even register that one.
do remember that the intent of it is to, foster the values that we've heard from the community and have those more spacious setbacks. So you could just go the neighborly path. Are there any other questions in the room before we sign off for the online portion?
Want to say thank you for putting all the effort to try to make it easier for us.
Feel free to reach out to planning over and over and over again. It's a free process to ask us questions. It's a lot cheaper than asking once you already hire a professional to do your plans and finding out that way. So that's what we're here for. Oh, we do have some comments on Zoom. So,
The person who asked about conversion ADUs, I think you touched.
okay, so somebody asked about conversion ADUs. I think we went through that. And that's it. So, we'll go ahead and close the online meeting for now. We'll have